This video is sponsored by the Center for Writing and Speaking at Agnes Scott College.
Hello friends, my name is Arin, and I'm going to start our first section talking about how to gain authority and presenting your own analysis. This is a really important piece of writing in American colleges and universities, so we're going to go over a definition of authority in writing and some strategies to help you convey that in your work. But first we're going to start with what authority means. When thinking about authority and presenting critical analysis, remember that it is totally acceptable in American college writing to present an original critique of an author's work. So don't hesitate to let your opinions guide your writing process. You are always the authority in your own experience. It is encouraged to start analysis from your own perspective and to find other scholars who agree with you or take a similar approach. This means that this concept is twofold. You gain authority by having secondary sources that bolster your point, and you gain authority by writing with authority. Here are some general strategies for writing with authority that you could incorporate. You're going to want to stay away from using the first-person point of view, but you can absolutely present your own thoughts in a different format. So, for example, hear the difference between, "I don't think Smith makes a convincing argument because I interpreted the play differently," versus, "Smith fails to acknowledge the possibility of alternate interpretations, which makes his argument less convincing." Both of these statements are saying basically the same thing, but one of them takes a much clearer stance. You achieve this by using definitive stances. Always make sure you say what you mean and don't apologize for it. That being said, you can and should totally acknowledge other opinions, but always reinforce to your reader why your thesis is right. For example, one might say something like, "Some scholars have argued against interpreting Smith's work in this way, but this framework is the only approach that appropriately explains the character arc of Samantha, the younger sister." The next tip is that you should absolutely use other sources to support your thesis, but add your own analysis to these sources and clearly articulate to your reader why they support your argument. And finally, make sure you thoroughly understand the work you are engaging in first, which is what our next section is focused on. So in this section, we're going to talk about how to evaluate issues and ideas carefully. In class or while listening to pre-recorded lectures, you should absolutely circle, star, or highlight that which you find interesting or just even don't understand, and come back to those topics when it's time to write. Always take note of what professors focus on and what additional resources they provide, because that could also help your writing process. If you're not somebody who likes to take a lot of notes, or that doesn't work for you while listening in class, you can also try visualizing the concepts being talked about and connecting these ideas through mind mapping when it's time to brainstorm assignments. Some other tips that are more focused on when you're reading is that you're going to want to try to have a conversation with the text. So you want to think about questions you have, initial thoughts, and really break down key concepts to increase your comprehension. Something that can be helpful is highlighting the development of the argument, taking note of the thesis, topic sentences, and counter-arguments in your article or book chapter, and just keeping track of the breakdown of the text. If you're feeling unsure, you can absolutely go to a professor's office hours or bring it up in class. Asking for clarification from the professor shows that you're serious about the course material. And notice what you notice. Like I said before, you are always the authority on your own experience. When something interests you, focus your analysis and attention on it. Finally, in general, if you find something compelling, seek out other scholarship on the area by making librarian appointments, visiting office hours, or looking at previous course readings. You also might want to check to see what other literature is out there and if you can support your thesis with the evidence you have. Now, Drisana is going to talk about how to integrate those secondary sources into your analysis.
Hi everyone, my name is Drisana, and like Arin, I will be talking you through a few more general expectations for American college writing. The first topic is analysis and critical thinking. In American college writing, you'll see the term analysis thrown around quite often. There are many forms of analysis, and each has its own purpose. However, generally speaking, an analysis serves to push you as a writer to deeply explore and interpret a source. This can sometimes make an assignment seem daunting, but you need not worry. I'm about to walk you through 3 actions you can take to ensure you are properly analyzing a source. Please keep in mind that while this is a broad overview of analytical writing, different disciplines and assignments will have distinct requirements. For more information on this, please feel free to refer to the Analysis by Discipline workshop coming later in the semester. Step 1. Examine. Take the time to really engage with your source. Summarize longer sections and pull out keywords and phrases. This is the time to really understand what the source is aiming to communicate. These preliminary observations will help you in the next step. Step 2. Select. Now that you have closely examined the source, think about what stood out to you. What ideas did you find most thought-provoking? Refer back to your examination from Step 1 and use your notes to help guide you through choosing the most appropriate material. Step 3. Interpret. Since you now understand the source and have selected specific material, you are prepared to interpret that information. Why did you notice this in particular? What does it mean in the source? How does it contribute to your understanding of the source? Use questions like these to deepen your interpretation. This last step leads me into the second half of the topic, critical thinking. Critical thinking imposes intellectual standards on the structures inherent in thinking as a way to generate questions, assess information, and come to well-rounded conclusions. It can be defined as self-disciplined, self-directed, self-monitored, and self-corrective thinking. Similar to Step 3 of developing an analysis, there are some guiding questions you can ask yourself to promote critical thinking. The following questions are just a few examples categorized by elements of thought. Assumptions. What am I taking for granted? What assumption has led me to that conclusion? Implications or consequences. If someone accepted my position, what would be the implications? What am I implying? Points of view. From what point of view am I looking at this issue? On this next slide, you will find a list of many questions like this one that we just discussed using different elements of thinking and universal intellectual standards. Feel free to pause the video here to take the time to review them. The next topic I'm going to touch on is integrating course readings and secondary scholarships within your assignment. Your course readings and secondary scholarships are incredibly helpful resources. You can think of them as the foundational pieces when developing your assignments. Let's practice some guided imagery to better understand what I mean. Take a moment, close your eyes, and imagine a house. Before you can build the roof, the walls, the floors, you need a foundation. The stronger the foundation, the stronger the home. If you take the time to thoughtfully annotate your sources, you should be able to pull out information from your readings that will not only create that integral founding piece of your assignment, but will also act as a springboard for your own new ideas. Next in this workshop, you'll be hearing from Felicia, who will explore different techniques to reading comprehension. Here you'll learn how to extract the important and relevant information to guide you through your assignments.
Hi everyone, my name is Felicia Jacques and I'm a senior at Agnes Scott. Previously, Drisana explained how analysis and critical thinking can be integrated into course readings and secondary scholarship. The section will first provide strategies on how to comprehensively read that scholarship. Then, I will briefly review and provide strategies on how to identify key points in the prompt to structure your response in line with requirements for an essay and discussion forum post. Lastly, I will talk about the differences between structuring and organizing an essay versus a discussion post and how to navigate both. Since we have made the switch to a fully remote semester, we could imagine that professors will be assigning these two writing mediums more so than others. So we wanted to make sure that we provide you with the tools to navigate between either style of writing. Let's first start with strategies on how to comprehensively read. In general, reading comprehension is the ability to process a text by understanding what an author writes and how they write. It is also the act of questioning why an author wrote this specific piece of text and then connecting that to either personal experience or everyday life. Full reading comprehension leads to effective research and substantial conversation for classes. Here are a few strategies for reading comprehension. 1. Identify what you are reading for. Sometimes you could be reading to gain background information or to develop an argument. 2. Annotate by having a conversation with the text. You could start by circling or underlining the main idea. Thesis statements, names, dates, places, important ideas, or events. Annotating can also include writing questions, reactions, or connections you may have in the margins of the text. This will help increase engagement with the text, and you could use these reactions to start conversation in class. Lastly, take your time. As you read, it is fine to reread sections and slow down as you take in all of the information, but make sure you give yourself enough time here. Try to set time aside for about an hour or so for this reading comprehension process. After reading a text, you normally have an assignment with the prompt that follows. Now that we've talked about how to comprehensively read, let's chat about how to dissect the prompts so that you can begin writing your assignment. When distinguishing between what to write and how to write for an essay versus an online discussion post, identifying key points in the prompt is so important. Look for action verbs such as compare, reflect, justify, or explain, which will hint to the type of writing and thinking your professor wants you to engage in. Then, consider whether your professor is asking you to incorporate sources. Are you only meant to include primary or secondary sources? Also, think about what style of citation and writing is the professor asking for. MLA, APA, Chicago? Comb through the prompt to identify any other requirements like these. Once you identify these items, you could have a better understanding on how to structure your work. Lastly, let's now move on to discussion about the differences in structure and organization between an essay and an online discussion forum post. These are two very different mediums, but both can be very effective when done right. The first big difference is length. While discussion posts are normally shorter and dictated by word count, essays are much longer and are structured around page limits. With this in mind, we could begin to gain a sense of how much detail should be placed within either writing form. A traditional essay contains the following elements: an introduction paragraph with the clear thesis statement, body paragraphs that support the same thesis statement, and a conclusion paragraph that summarizes the main points provided in the body paragraphs with a few sentences about the broader implications of your research in today's world. A discussion post looks completely different, especially depending on the word count provided by a professor. In general, though, a discussion post is about 300 words or less. Thus, students do not have the space to follow the same format of an essay. So what then do you include in an online post? When writing a discussion post, even if short, professors want to see that you have engaged with the assigned reading. Pull out a few quotes or lines that you found interesting. Talk about why you found them interesting and how the reading connects to what you are learning. If there is an assigned question, tailor your answer to that question while highlighting what you learned from the reading and how it applies to in-class discussion. This will show the professor that you are engaging in the text in ways outside of just reading it. Now that we have discussed how to comprehensively read, identify key points in a prompt and the differences in structure and organization between an essay and online discussion forum posts. Next, you will hear a few tips on how to navigate the in-person and online class discussion from fellow tutor Amaris Sawyer.
Thanks again to everyone for tuning into our virtual workshop. My name is Amaris Sawyer. I'm a second-year tutor for the Center for Writing and Speaking, and in this section of the workshop, we will be discussing some tips and tricks for both in-person and online classroom discussion. Before moving forward, let's first ensure that we all understand active participation. As scholars, I am sure this is something that we are all familiar with, so I'll give a very brief recap. Active participation can be defined as the consistent and simultaneous engagement of all learners with the content of a lesson or discussion. One of the many goals of active participation is to increase both the rate and degree of learning. Examples of active participation are raising your hand to answer questions asked by your professor, adding to class discussion, taking notes, and posing both clarifying and open-ended questions. The first step for actively participating in our classroom discussion is to get the floor. This is the way in which we notify the professor and our classmates that we have something to say. In our in-person classes, we may raise our hand and make eye contact with the professor, to which they would then allow us to speak or ask us to wait until another student has spoken. This can be difficult in our virtual setting as professors may or may not be able to tell if you are raising your hand. Some ways to obtain the floor in our Zoom classes is to use the raise hand feature that you can locate by first clicking the participants button located on the toolbar at the bottom of your screen and then selecting the raise hand that is at the bottom right toolbar. You may also want to notify the class that you have something to say by putting your comments in the Zoom chat. This feature is also located on the toolbar at the bottom of your screen. Some professors may provide a specific way that they want you to participate in discussion, either on the first day of class or in the course syllabus. If you are unsure about the most effective way to participate in class, don't hesitate to follow up with your professor. Now we will focus on small group discussion in breakout rooms. Although large group discussion in the classroom are standard for courses at Agnes, there are times where the professor will assign you to smaller groups or allow you to make your own small group for discussion. For the most part, small group discussion during our classes on Zoom will take place in breakout rooms. These small group discussions are a great tool to test your own understanding of the discussion's content and to share your ideas with a smaller audience before sharing them in your larger group discussion if you're someone who is shy. It is important to point out that breakout sessions in Zoom tend to have a time limit and will prompt you to return to the main session after the time limit is up. If your professor has asked you to answer specific discussion questions or focus on a specific part of the text, it will be important to start that discussion as soon as possible. Therefore, don't ever be afraid to begin the discussion in your breakout rooms. Begin with a quick introduction of yourself by saying hello and your name, then jumping right in by posing the first discussion question or asking an open-ended question as simple as, "What did you all think of the reading?" One of the main hurdles in both in-person and online discussion can be navigating speakers' anxiety. If you're like me, speaking in front of the class can be nerve-wracking and even scary. However, we know that active participation in our classes maximizes our learning, so it is encouraged, even for those who are not big fans of speaking. Some tips for navigating speakers' anxiety include 1. Writing down your questions and comments in a notebook so you won't forget them during class discussion. 2. Sharing your ideas in your class discussion post on Canvas or small group discussion to encourage yourself to share them in the larger discussion. And 3. Sharing your comments in the chat to let the professor know that you are engaging in the discussion even though you have not vocalized your ideas. Feel free to use these tips to effectively participate in your class discussions. Now that we have addressed general expectations for writing, essay form and online discussion forums, and in-person versus online discussion, let's take some time to test our knowledge with a brief recap activity led by Arin Yost.
Thanks, Amaris. Hi friends, it's Arin back again. In this section, we're just going to review what we talked about earlier through a series of questions. After I ask the question, there will be a little time for you to reflect, but please pause and take as much time as you need before beginning again. First, when you start to read a text, what should your first step be to ensure maximum reading comprehension? Go ahead and pause to think. Welcome back. Before you even start reading, you want to identify what you're reading for. Are you reading to summarize, critique, contrast? The answer to that question will help you understand the material much better. Next, let's review this excerpt of a prompt from a political science class. For your final project, you will combine your learning on the U.S. 2016 presidential election and the state that you have been assigned to follow into a series of short papers or articles detailing the major issues of your choosing about which you would like to write. Take a moment to look over this prompt and identify what kind of analysis you might be doing, and think about how you might incorporate secondary sources. Pause the video for as long as you need and play when you're ready to hear what our thoughts were. So, looking at this prompt, it sounds like the kind of writing you'll be doing is mostly summary of whatever major issues you choose. That means you might be looking at news articles, non-governmental organizations, nonprofits, and government websites to get lots of information about a specific topic. However, these aren't the only options, so you might have thought of some other ideas. It's It's all about what works for you. For our next question, let's consider the following situation. You're assigned to write a paper on a specific article. You don't agree with an author's conclusion, but you don't know if anyone else agrees with you. Take a second to pause and reflect about what you would do in this situation, then play when you're ready. So, some options that you could consider would be going to office hours to talk to your professor about the article, making a library appointment to find other sources that might more closely align with your thesis, or making a mind map to help you really visualize why you feel the author's conclusion was lacking. Of course, these are all just options. Our last review question is, what is one strategy you remember for participating in Zoom class discussions? Again, pause to think and then press play when you're ready. So some strategies that Amaris discussed included writing down your thoughts before speaking so you don't blank out, participating in small breakout rooms before bringing up a point in the larger class, and sharing comments in the chat so your professor knows you're staying engaged. That's it for this section and this portion of the workshop. Thank y'all so much for tuning in. We hope to see you at the Zoom Q&A on September 17th to talk about this content more in depth.